Hi, it's Brian. Welcome to the Awards Contender. I'm very excited to welcome CODY DERICKS back today to continue my Horror and the Oscars series. Today we're talking about why The Silence of the Lambs dominated at the Academy Awards in early 1992. How are we doing, CODY?
Very, very good. I love this movie.
Right? Doesn't everybody?
It's just... Come on. It's the best. It's Silence of the Lambs. It's one of the best ever.
It's such a treat to talk about this movie. I haven't really mentioned it much on the channel, I want to say. I mean, I've done some, best acting Oscar wins videos of, the 90s and things. But I haven't fully explored this amazing movie in its own video. So I'm very excited to talk about it with you today.
I'm really excited to talk about its Oscar history, especially because I think what happened with this film at the Oscars is kind of a miracle and is one of the few moments where most people kind of go, they nailed it that year. Good job, Oscars. Good job, Academy.
This was a moment the Academy could have done the wrong thing. They could have looked at The Silence of the Lambs and said, it's too violent, it's gory, it's about subject matter we don't care for, so let's go with a safer option. Let's go with, Bugsy or something. That they went all in on Silence of the Lambs is kind of remarkable, looking back, especially to that period of Oscars history. The kinds of films that were winning things around the early 90s, late 80s. You don't see a movie like this represented very much.
I've seen this movie 10, 11, 12 times in my life. I know it very well. I've read the book. This most recent rewatch, I found more disturbing than ever. And none of it is a surprise. I know what's going to happen in every scene of this film. But for some reason, as I've gotten older, it impacts me in different ways. In a way that only the best art does. The best achievements in artistic expression change and grow with you in terms of your reaction as you grow and change as a person. And this is no exception.
It's not in my top 10 of all time, but it's definitely in my top 20. This is that rare movie that I feel gets better every time I watch it. As you said, there's so many aspects of this film to explore, things that you pick up on, things you learn that maybe you didn't see the previous viewing. And it's just so rich in so many ways, starting with those amazing performances by Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, the cinematography, the direction, the pacing of the movie. It's so well done. I feel like if this movie had been made 10 years later, like Hannibal or something, the pacing wouldn't have been as strong. The slow nature of the storytelling makes it so compelling, gives it this haunting quality. I always love taking this ride. It's just one of the great movies of all time. So we're going to talk about this film's trajectory in award season at the Oscars, starting with the Golden Globes, CODY, where it got into a lot of categories, but it only wins Best Actress for Jodie Foster in Motion Picture Drama. It does not win Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins. It does not win Best Picture or Best Director. What do you think about this movie's Golden Globe nominations and non-wins?
Its Golden Globes run is probably what I imagine fans of the film and those who worked on it expected of the film's awards chances at best.
Yeah, it's really interesting at the Golden Globes how much they spread the love. So drama goes to Bugsy. Actor in a motion picture drama goes to Nick Nolte for The Prince of Tides. Best Director goes to Oliver Stone for JFK. Best Screenplay goes to Thelma and Louise. I mean, it's almost like every movie that was up for nominations that year wins something. There was no sweep of anything. So we haven't mentioned yet, CODY, that The Silence of the Lambs came out Valentine's Day weekend, 1991, a full year before the Oscars even happened. Do you think that release date very early in 91 actually helped The Silence of the Lambs build momentum throughout the year leading into early 92?
I guess that's what I would say in hindsight, but on the other hand, if it had lost its Oscars or had not won as many as it won, I would say, well, part of the reason is because it came out 14 months before the Oscars. On the other hand, like you said, that could be part of the reason why it did well, that people have had time to think about it and appreciate it. It wasn't just this horror movie that came out in November, December, impressed everybody, but didn't have time to gestate and be called this great work of art.
This was a case where I do think if The Silence of the Lambs had come out Christmas Day of 91, I don't think it goes on to sweep at the Oscars. I think it needed that time throughout a year plus to get people to see it and come to really love it and want to reward it come Oscar time. Yeah, so let's get into The Silence of the Lambs at the Oscars. So it gets 7 nominations. It, of course, wins the top 5, one of only 3 movies to do that. Picture, director, actor, actress, screenplay. Let's talk about the other 2 nominations it got first. The 2 nominations it didn't win, starting with Best Film Editing. The Silence of the Lambs loses to JFK. What do you think of that category?
I would obviously give this to Silence of the Lambs. JFK is a very propulsive film, though. There's a lot of footage to go through. It's like almost documentary-like in that way. So I see why it won, and clearly they liked the film, so I could see its wins here in cinematography being the kind of like places to reward that film, and those categories are often paired up.
Yeah, I mean, JFK makes sense here. I mean, if you're going to give that movie 1 Oscar, like, the editing of that film is kind of extraordinary. Like, you really notice it, which editing isn't supposed to make the viewer notice it. But you definitely
Not necessarily,
do in that movie.
But yeah, exactly.
In Best Sound, The Silence of the Lambs loses to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, I'm more okay with this loss here. I'm not too sad about it. I do think the sound work in Silence of the Lambs is exceptional, especially in that later scene where we're in the basement. But, I mean, Terminator 2 is one of the most well-crafted films of all time from a technical standpoint, so it can have this one.
Yeah, when it comes to the technical categories, Terminator 2 is going to dominate, at least in a few of those, like sound and visual effects. So it makes sense that Academy voters would go in that direction more so than Silence of the Lambs. So let's move on to Best Adapted Screenplay, which Ted Tally wins for The Silence of the Lambs. The other nominees here are Europa, Fried Green Tomatoes, JFK, and The Prince of Tides. Did any other film here have a shot to beat Silence of the Lambs in screenplay?
You know, I could see people thinking this probably would be the place to reward Silence of the Lambs. Similar to something like American Fiction last year. You know, you see screenplay categories go to movies that don't necessarily win many other Oscars, if any. And if they wanted to award The Silence of the Lambs as a film, I think the screenplay is a pretty good place to do so.
I feel like Prince of Tides would have been in second place there. I just feel like that was a beloved movie and it was winning things. Maybe not in that category, but I feel like that might have been in second. Yeah, I love that win for Ted Tally. Let's move to Best Actor in a Leading Role. Anthony Hopkins, of course, wins for The Silence of the Lambs. The other nominees are Warren Beatty, Bugsy, Robert De Niro, Cape Fear, Nick Nolte, The Prince of Tides, and Robin Williams, The Fisher King. What do we think of this category?
I think this is a pretty good lineup, actually. The only performance here I don't love is Warren Beatty and Bugsy, but it's still not bad. Nick Nolte is pretty great in The Prince of Tides, and if he had won, I would, probably be saying Anthony Hopkins should have won, but I wouldn't be too sad about it. And then De Niro is doing some crazy stuff in Cape Fear, but it's good work. And then The Fisher King is an interesting turn for Robin Williams. It's like a co-lead with Jeff Bridges, but he's definitely the more showy of the two. He's playing a guy who's a bit more, wacky. And it's good work from Robin Williams. It's maybe nothing too surprising from him. It's very tapped into his natural abilities, but I love Robin Williams.
Yeah, I feel like if there was one person who could have taken this over Hopkins, it was Nick Nolte, because he won the Golden Globe Award for motion picture drama, and he's definitely in more of that movie than Hopkins is in Silence of the Lambs. And I feel like this might have been closer than we think. Decades on, we're like, well, of course Hopkins was going to win. Of course. But he's only in about 20 minutes of Silence of the Lambs. And so a lot of voters could have said, this is category fraud. He belongs in supporting actor. I looked a few minutes ago. Hopkins won a few critics' prizes in supporting actor, not lead actor. So there was that conversation happening. I'm so happy it worked out the way it did, because I think we would be calling this one of the biggest snubs in Oscar history if Hopkins had lost this.
Especially if the film wins the 4 other awards it does win. Then that one loss really stands out, especially for a character that would become so iconic after this film, and it's tied forever to Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, and I feel like Beatty might have gotten some votes too, just because he never won an acting Oscar. He'd only won director for Reds. And Bugsy came out at the end of the year. People loved that movie at the time. I feel like Beatty might have been a close third, too. Would we be mad today if Hopkins had won his Oscar for Silence of the Lambs in supporting actor?
I'm personally fine with him being in lead, but I think if he's in supporting, nobody goes, well, and we all know that's category fraud. He should be in lead because, like, no, fine. If he's supporting, he's supporting.
I wonder who made that call. I'm sure there was conversation about Hopkins going supporting. I wonder if that was Hopkins himself, his team. They said, no, we're going lead.
Right, and like as we know, ultimately it comes down to the Oscar voters. So they agreed with the with the placement, and he was lead at the Globe. So I do wonder if by that point the distributor had kind of pushed him in lead.
All right, let's move on to Best Actress. Jodie Foster wins for Silence of the Lambs. The other nominees are Gina Davis, Thelma and Louise, Laura Dern, Rambling Rose, Bette Midler for The Boys, Susan Sarandon, Thelma and Louise. What do we think of that category?
So it's funny because obviously I love Jodie Foster. It's one of my favorite wins of all time, regardless of category. I think both women from Thelma and Louise are exceptional. I give a slight edge to Gina Davis personally, but they're both really great. And then there's the other two. For the Boys is entertaining and Bette is good in it, but it's not amazing work. It's not career best work. She should have won for the Rose, obviously. She also has some of the worst old age makeup I've ever seen. Obviously, that's not her fault, but it doesn't help the performance. And then Rambling Rose is a movie I really don't like. I really don't get Laura Dern's nomination here.
So this is obviously a very important Oscar category in the history of the show because this is the last time two people from the same movie get into Best Actress, right? It's been over 30 years. I always wonder, would Jodie Foster have won her second Oscar in 3 years if, let's say, only Gina Davis gets in for Thelma and Louise, but not Susan Sarandon? There had to have been some vote splitting there, right?
Jodie Foster probably was doing just well enough on her own, regardless of who else is in the category. She wins the Golden Globe, obviously. She had just won. I'm just realizing she wins in the same ceremony as Gina Davis, so they're both equal distance from their Oscar. Like what we said about Screenplay, I could see Jodie Foster winning this category, regardless of how well the film does otherwise.
I tend to think Foster still would have won, especially since Silence of the Lambs dominates to such an extent, like getting picture, director, actor. I think she still would have won, even if one of the Thelma and Louise actors had gotten in and not both of them. But it is interesting that after this happens, it's like, okay, no more two people from the same movie getting into lead actress or lead actor. Like, it doesn't happen anymore. But at the end of the day, what a fantastic Oscar win. Jodie Foster for Silence of the Lambs. I mean, I like her win for The Accused. That's a very good performance. But boy, I love that she won for Silence of the Lambs. That also would have been a huge snub for the ages if somehow she had lost that. All right, 2 categories left. Let's talk about Best Director. Jonathan Demme wins for Silence of the Lambs. The other nominees are John Singleton, Boys in the Hood, Barry Levinson, Bugsy, Oliver Stone, JFK, and Ridley Scott, Thelma and Louise. What do we think of the Best Director category this year, Cody?
I think it's actually a pretty decent lineup. The thing about it is that John Singleton's nomination is very important here. He's only 24 at the time, so he's the youngest nominee ever to this day, and he's the first black nominee ever, which is kind of crazy. You know, Ridley Scott for Thelma and Louise is the one other one besides John Singleton that's not coming from a Best Picture nomination. So this is a category that doesn't have 5 for 5 or even 4 for 5. Unfortunately, the one that we're missing is Barbra Streisand for Prince of Tides. So, you know, they had the chance to nominate a woman here and they didn't do it, which is, you know, unfortunate, but there's only so many slots.
So this is Ridley Scott's first Oscar nomination. For Thelma and Louise Best Director, he wasn't nominated for Alien. He wasn't nominated for Blade Runner. Like, this was his introduction to the Oscars in terms of nominations, so that's kind of cool. And then, as you said, John Singleton, so important for the history books, that nomination in more than one way. And then you have Levinson and Stone, and I feel like they're happy to be there, but they weren't going to win this. I mean, Oliver Stone had 2 Oscar wins at this point for Best Director, for Platoon and Born on the 4th of July. So he wasn't going to win. And I feel like Bugsy was underperforming enough to where Levinson didn't have a shot. Jonathan Demme winning here for The Silence of the Lambs is perfection. Like, this should not have gone to anyone else. It was his only Oscar win in his career. I'm so happy he got to win this one and only time for Silence of the Lambs.
It's the rare thing where a director is winning for their best film. And the Academy doesn't always have a habit of recognizing an artist at the peak of their achievements, but that did happen here. And it's even crazier that it happened for this movie. I do think even though Barry Levinson had just won, he probably is in second place, because I do think Bugsy was something of a kind of front runner. And looking at the lineup, I don't really know who else would win. To your point, I mean, like, Thelma and Louise and Boys in the Hood are not in Best Picture. Oliver Stone already had 2. It would be insane if he won 3 Oscars in 5 years. That is crazy.
So yeah, Demme wins, very well deserved. That takes us to Best Picture. The Silence of the Lambs wins, of course. The other nominees are Beauty and the Beast, Bugsy, JFK, and The Prince of Tides. What do we think of Best Picture of 91?
It's a good one. I mean, Bugsy is for me the clear, like, dud. And even that is not a bad movie. It's just not great or super exciting. It's very standard. But the other 4 are all really stellar in their own way. You know, you have something as cool as Beauty and the Beast becoming the first Best Picture nominee that's animated. You have Silence of the Lambs winning, and it's a horror movie that came out, again, like 13 months before the ceremony. You have Prince of Tides, which is directed by Barbra Streisand, a female director, obviously. There's just like a lot of really interesting stuff in this lineup.
Yeah, the only one I would take out here, to your point, is Bugsy. I would take that out and put in Thelma and Louise. I think that film deserves to be in Best Picture. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite films of 91. But yeah, that Beauty and the Beast nomination is amazing. Have you seen, it's on YouTube, the clip of Kathleen Turner revealing the Oscar nominations?
Oh,
and she says,
it's one I watch a lot.
She says the nominees for Best Picture are, and she like leans into the mic and she goes, Beauty and the Beast, and the room just erupts. Like, we have never heard a press room erupt for the Oscar nominations announcement. They go nuts.
I think also something that points to Silence of the Lambs' success for me is that Beauty and the Beast, I think, is basically as good as an animated film can get. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's personally a very important film for me. It was the first show I ever saw on stage, and yet I still would not give it Best Picture. It just shows you how good Silence of the Lambs is.
So yeah, these are great nominations. I'm so happy Silence of the Lambs wins. Like, what do you think of this, Cody? Like, a horror film, not only like dominating a lot of categories, but winning Best Picture at the Oscars. It doesn't happen very often. Why did it happen for Silence of the Lambs?
It's one of the few times that Best Picture is won, I think, on total merit, total quality. It is just that good. I think it's, I don't want to say undeniable, because there's, you know, it's such a graphic film in many ways. There's a lot to deny if that's not your thing. But I think for those who love it, it's impossible to not love it. And I can see a lot of people throwing their vote to Silence of the Lambs almost like a, well, it's never going to win because of what it is, because of who we are as the Academy, but I love it. It's a great film, and it remains as one of the best choices the Oscars ever made, period. Not just in this category, but in any category. It stands the test of time so well, and it just makes them look very good, almost to the point where it makes some of their lesser choices look worse, because it's like, but you gave Silence of the Lambs Best Picture, so you know what good movies are, right? Why'd you give it to Crash? What happened there?
Yeah, and this is right around the time they give Driving Miss Daisy Best Picture. And they seem to be a little out of touch, right? But then they give Silence of the Lambs Best Picture, and it's like, okay, we're good. like you're back in our good graces. You know what is the best film of the year, and that's Silence of the Lambs.
It's really just a wonderful choice by the Academy, which is something that they're not always capable of doing. But things like this, wins like this, are why we keep returning to the Oscars, because we want something this good to happen again. We want the best film to win. We want a win that we can look back on 30 plus years later and go, they really nailed it that year. Good job, Academy. So we keep returning to the Oscars, hoping for a win like Silence of the Lambs. It's just one of the greatest achievements of film of all time. It is a highlight of not only the genre, but American filmmaking in general. It's one of the best films of the 90s. I could go on and giving it accolades, but the movie speaks for itself. It is a masterpiece for all time.
And I feel like this is an example of a movie where the Oscars did help it in a way. I feel like any young people who might just be looking back on Oscars history, they see, oh, this film got 5 big wins in picture, director, actor, actress, screenplay. Let's take a look. And any reason that people can come to The Silence of the Lambs to discover this incredible film, like a masterpiece in the history of cinema, I'm so happy the Academy made the right decision and let this movie dominate to such an extent in early 1992. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the amazing run The Silence of the Lambs had at the Oscars, and we'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.